Hey guys, what's up? This is What's Tech, and this is Apple's latest refresh to the 11-inch iPad Pro. More specifically, this is their 4th generation of this product. Now for this iPad Pro, there are primarily 2 changes that differentiate this from its previous iteration. In addition to those 2 changes, there's also a pretty big iPadOS update that now allows for integrated trackpad and cursor support. But that's coming out to all supported iPads anyway, so we'll be primarily looking at those 2 in this review. First one out of the bat is that this now has Apple's latest A12Z processor inside of it, A12Z Bionic. That's different from the last generation of this machine, and also it has 2 cameras on this now, because 2 is better than 1, it seems. Now onto design, we have the exact same form factor as the 2018 3rd generation iPad Pro. Flat industrial design reminiscent of the iPhone 4 and 5, as well as a whole new larger camera system on the back. Flipping over to the front, we have Apple's Liquid Retina display. That's basically their PR term, their marketing term for a Retina display that stretches all the way across, and Face ID module on the top if held in vertical mode. Moving on to I/O, this would be pretty fast, I promise. Just one USB-C port for all of its ups and downs. Again, USB-C is a very versatile port, but having one is pretty limiting. Now, the screen is still Apple's 120Hz Pro Motion display with wide color gamut, capable of 600 nits of brightness, and that's not something to go, hey, they were lazy on. This is a really good display still. The screen is adaptive and adjusts how quickly it refreshes based on contextually what you're doing. This results in a more fluid experience, responsive feel, and better battery life, because for things that won't need a super fast screen like reading, it will scale down. But when you're watching videos or moving around the UI, it will bounce right back up to feel more responsive. And as I mentioned earlier, just navigating the UI, it is a nice treat to have. With that Pro Motion display, this really does feel like a device that came out of the future. But with more and more smartphones in the market transitioning to high refresh screens, this is no longer a huge differentiating factor. I'm sure someday, not in the too distant future, we're gonna see every iPad with a 120Hz display. Now onto internals and performance. This guy here, the 11-inch, as well as all other SKUs by the way, has 6 GB of RAM out of the box, irregardless of how much storage you have, as opposed to the 2018 3rd generation version. And all of them are going to be having Apple's A12Z processor inside. And the difference between the Z and the X is that the A12Z is primarily focused on graphical performance gains. I'm not going to say all new processor because it's looking like, from some articles I've read and rumor mills, and I think these are pretty accurate by the way, I'll link them down below. The A12Z is basically a rebinned A12X. A12X has 8 cores in it, but Apple advertises 7 because one of those GPU cores is turned off. However, the A12Z has all 8 cores firing up and active. And I believe this personally because in Apple's own marketing, year over year, they always talk about how fast this iPad Pro is compared to the last one. They're not talking about it this time. Why is that? Because there's not much of a difference. Does this make them lazy? Well, no, of course not. The engineering feat required to accomplish the A12X in the first place was still magnificent, by all means. But you're not gonna notice much of a performance gain if you're benchmarking between this guy and last generations. And when they say they have an 8th extra GPU core, what does that really translate to real life usage? Not much. You'd be hard pressed to find a difference, if any at all. But if that sounded too negative, don't worry. It pretty much honestly just ends there. It still serves the web like a champ, keeps Safari tabs and applications open for me in the background without closing for them for a wickedly long time, sometimes 2 days honestly. And switching between apps is simple and easy, especially if you used an iPad before, just a swipe up. Now battery life for this machine is pretty great, I'd say. I'm averaging around 7.5, around 8 hours. Apple tells us that it should last you 10 hours. It's a little less than that, but 7.5 to 8 is still pretty good. And that's me using it for lots of reading, surfing the web, as well as watching videos such as YouTube, Netflix, and Crunchyroll. Now, if I'm not watching an inordinate amount of videos, and if I'm not using this as a media consumption machine, which is what tablets pretty much are, honestly, I can make this last maybe a day and a half. On the second day of usage, it usually dies out around the halfway mark, maybe around 3 p.m. depending when you start your day. And it goes without saying, your mileage may vary of course. Thanks to the new version of iPadOS 13.4, there is now far better integration of mouse and trackpad support. And without getting too much into it, because it does deserve its own video, Apple did it in a pretty ingenious way. Now keep in mind that ever since Apple first launched iOS back in the very first iPhone, this operating system was designed to be used primarily, or actually only by touch. Now, instead of redesigning the whole operating system to complement both pointer and touch inputs, Apple instead made the cursor or pointer adapt to the UI instead. That's pretty amazing. The cursor, get this, becomes sticky and clings onto buttons or icons and then becomes visible and indicates to the user you can click on this and what's going on. Now, I can't overstate this enough. It is pretty ingenious, and although primarily the best applications that respond to this new cursor support are Apple's own first-party apps, and even they're still rolling out updates to their other apps, as time moves on, third-party app developers will adjust their applications to take advantage of this new support. And so, with that in mind, it only gets better from here. Now, pivoting towards an area that I'm personally not a fan of, it's iPad photography. These guys here, the camera. The rear camera module has two lenses. The main one is a 12 megapixel wide angle camera, and the second one is a 10 megapixel ultra wide. I mean, I don't like iPad photography just because everyone else doesn't like it. I don't like it because it looks ridiculous, particularly if you have the larger 12.9 iPad Pro. But now the iPad Pro is capable of taking 4K video at 60 frames per second and taking fun ultra wide shots, and they are fun to take in frame. It's something you can't pass up now. If you're paying iPad Pro money, you might as well take advantage of the camera and don't mind other people like me for judging you from the distance. This guy here is a 7 megapixel shooter capable of recording at 1080p. And you know, if you're like me, a tablet pretty much becomes your dedicated FaceTime machine because you don't want to burn your phone's battery life. And this is what it looks like and sounds like thanks to the microphone. And now arguably the largest change that probably Apple's proud of is that matte black circle, kind of opaque, in the rear camera module. That's a LiDAR sensor. You may already know of LiDAR thanks to it being a key technology in self-driving cars, and now it's in the iPad Pro. Now, the LiDAR sensor is primarily used to improve Apple's push into augmented reality. For example, when I used it to measure a couple things, play around, like I measured my keyboard, for example, and it said 14 inches, and it is in fact 14 inches. That's good, that's good to know. But personally, I don't see what the big push into AR is as of yet. Apple may be thinking long-term here, but as of right now, it's just a gimmicky feature, honestly. Playing around with furnitures from IKEA.com and seeing how they fit in your room, that's all fun and all, but the novelty does wear off relatively quickly. However, I don't feel quite confident, and I don't think I'll ever feel confident using any tech company's measure tool. I would use a measuring tape still, because I can see it with physical proof. Ideally, and on a good note here, the LiDAR sensor does work, and it can discern depth really quickly. When you have two objects of the same color, and they're near each other, using traditional methods prior, your phone or your iPad could be confused over what the depth distance is. But the LiDAR sensor, because it's actually using lasers, that's how these work, it can tell, oh yeah, this is 1 inch forward and this is 1 inch back. Also, when talking to others, they tell me AR could be used for pushing big games and to improve them. But when I really think about it, because I'm a gamer as well, there is no augmented reality system pusher, There's no game that makes you go, oh, I gotta get that because the LiDAR sensor is gonna make it better. Now, to move back to hardware again for a bit, music listening or listening to anything on this is pretty sweet. It's a stereo setup with 4 speakers, 2 on each side, and they pretty much fill the room, honestly. Well, not a large room, but a fairly decent sized one. But if you want to casually listen to music or have a podcast / video playing in the background, this won't let you down at all, especially if you're doing chores. It can go pretty high without distorting, and yes, the microphone is pretty good. And now for the big question, is this the right tablet for you? I got the 11-inch iPad Pro here because I feel as if, and I may be wrong, we are humans, we're perfectly capable of making mistakes. But I believe that the 11-inch iPad Pro is going to be the most sold tablet of this Pro category for those who want an actual tablet experience. The 11-inch iPad Pro offers handedly the easiest single hand, get it, experience because the 12.9-inch is a little too unwieldy, honestly. Combine that with how fast it feels, the 120Hz display, and the great battery life, as well as you just know it's gonna hold its value, it's pretty hard to put counterpoints against it if you're not talking about the price. Any of Apple's iPad Pros right now are always gonna be the best of the best Apple can deliver. But the 2020 model right here, the 4th generation, it's so similar to the 3rd generation that my honest assessment of it is if you can get a 3rd generation 2018 iPad Pro, whatever size, right? If you can still get it new out of the box from any other retailer, then I say go for it. There's not much of a difference. Sure, you lose out on ultra wide lens, you lose out on the LiDAR sensor, but did you really care, honestly? Cool, and you lose out on that 8th GPU core. Again, when benchmarking the two devices together, they're so similar that they might as well be the same thing. And they pretty much are. And of course, we're not even talking about if you want to buy used or refurbished. If you want to be a brave person and try your luck in the used aftermarket scene, you can find some serious value propositions. And then if you purchase from Apple's own refurbished website, they're pretty much new and they have the Apple warranty still. So go check it out. Now the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, regardless of the generation, a review of that is pretty much going to be same as this, except I would just add on that for me, it feels unwieldy, it's uncomfortable to use in a hand, and due to the sheer size of it, it begs of me to put it on a desk. And that pretty much makes it a laptop replacement, or it tries to be. The 11 inch is a great tablet. The 12.9 inch is a potential laptop replacement, if that works for you. That extra screen real estate welcomes productivity and also is a better canvas for digital artists or creative types. And Apple knows that as well. That's why they made a bigger variant. And I think that's the best way to describe it. The iPad Pro 11 inch is a tablet that's okay with just being a tablet. Well, that's all folks, thanks for watching. Eventually Apple is gonna ship out that brand new Magic Keyboard type cover, and I'm pretty excited for that, even though it does have an eye-watering price point of $300 to $350, depending on how large your tablet is. But we'll be getting that and I'll be reviewing it down the road eventually. So stay tuned for that. Also, I'll be doing a pretty fun video in a bit. Well, this is gonna be the next video I'm working on, where we're gonna see, can an iPad replace your computer? I'm gonna genuinely try and see what I can get away with. It's in the works, it's in the official pipeline. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.